Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Bloomberg UK Politics, your bite-sized guide to the corridors of power. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm James Woolcock.
So 1 week down, 5 to go. It's now 7 full days since Rishi Sunak stood in the pouring rain and called that summer general election. Well, the weather's improved a fair bit, but the first campaign polls suggest that not much improvement so far for Sunak's party.
We've got something special for you today. We're joined by our Bloomberg UK Politics panel. In the blue corner, we have Chris Wilkins, who worked as Theresa May's Director of Strategy and the Chief Speechwriter when she was Prime Minister. Representing the Reds, Alice Perry, former chair of Labour's National Executive Committee and a former Islington councillor. And from Lib Dems, Luisa Porritt, a former member of the European Parliament and a former Lib Dem candidate for London Mayor. Welcome to you all. So we put this panel together because we wanted to try and get a sense of, from you political experts, how things are going. So Chris, to coin a song, things can only get wetter. After that rain-sodden launch, has the Tory campaign got its mojo back?
I think at the end of the first full week, I think the Conservatives will feel pretty happy with how the campaign's gone. I think, Westminster watchers can point to things that didn't go so well, such as the launch. But actually, they will think they've dominated the news agenda with their 3 big policy announcements on national service, the pension uplift, and on changes to apprenticeships. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to get cut through, so they'll be pretty happy. The downside of it, I think, as you alluded to, is that they'll look at that and say, great, we've dominated, people are talking about our policies, yet the polls have not shifted. And that will be, I think, within the Conservative campaign headquarters, a bit of a demoralising moment. They would have expected to see a bit of a shift at this point. And I think at this point, they're probably thinking, oh, what more do we need to do? And frankly, Labour haven't yet messed up, and that's what they're waiting for.
Alice, so no shift in the polls yet. That will be welcome news in Starmer's office. The last few days, they've been dominated by Corbyn and Abbott and those fights with the left. My sense is that many people in the leader's office will be quite happy to have this fight publicly. Is that something you'd agree with as well?
I think a key message to the public for this election and as part of Keir Starmer's leadership is that Labour has changed, and Labour has moved away from the devastating defeat in 2019 and is now representing the political mainstream, which is why so many people who voted Conservative in the past are now switching to Labour. And Labour wants to be getting ahead the messages that you can trust them on the economy, you can trust them on defence, you can trust them to control immigration and so on. So I think they'll be pleased with how it's gone so far, but nothing's been won yet. Not a single vote has been cast. So there's still a long way to go.
And what about that fight with the left? Do you think the leadership are happy for that to be done in public, or is this awkward for them?
When it comes to Jeremy Corbyn, I think it's been clear for a long time that it wouldn't be tenable for him to be the Labour candidate. So while he had the whip back and was only suspended recently, it's been clear for a long time that there'd be a different Labour candidate fighting the election. And I think that is important as well. It's important to move on from the past and to appreciate that a lot of people were hurt by Jeremy's social media posts and so on. And it's been really important to regain trust on being able to deal with anti-Semitism and those difficult issues. And Keir Starmer and his leadership has taken Labour from that defeat to now being 20 points ahead in the polls, and you really have to give them credit for that.
It's funny because I was actually at the North Islington Community Centre last night where Corbyn launched his campaign. And what was fascinating is after he'd spoken, just talking to the activists there, the word on everyone's lips was all about Diana Abbott and how many people there felt that beyond the left, there was a fear that Labour was losing touch with ethnic minorities, non-white communities in its quest to kind of purge itself. This whole story is fascinating, Alice, because in many ways, Labour have tried to pitch themselves as the slick, unified party in opposition to the Tories. And this is the first kind of crack that has been seen in the campaign.
I would say that having been on the other side of disciplinary decisions and stuff, that often how things get reported in the media when it comes to a range of these can be different from what you see behind the scenes. And the people making those decisions won't be able to kind of justify them or speak for themselves. So it's one of those things that it's like difficult to comment on, but due diligence is really, really important, as like we'll see in the election, and as you saw in like Rochdale when Labour weren't able to put forward a candidate. So the checks that they're doing on all of the candidates now are extremely important, and it's something that Keir's always taken really seriously, like to have high quality candidates at the election that the public can have trust in is really important for Labour.
Now, Louisa, I have to apologise for you in advance because it's absolutely impossible to ask this question without a groan-inducing pun, but is Ed Davey's campaign making a big enough of a splash?
Inevitable that those water puns would come through. Yeah, I think it is making a splash. I mean, these stunts are quite deliberate. I think everybody knows that Ed Davey has become quite famous for doing his stunts by now. We saw a number of them during the by-election wins that the Liberal Democrats had over the Conservatives in this Parliament. And we know that for the Lib Dems, actually airtime in the media is really critical because outside of an election period, the party doesn't have the opportunity to appear on the media as much because obviously everything's kind of done based on quotas and the number of seats that you hold in that current parliament. So the fact that Ed and other spokespeople are able to get out on the airwaves every single day is critical for the Lib Dems. To remind people that the party exists, that we are an option and an alternative and a viable alternative for them, particularly in seats where we are second to the Conservatives, which is 92 seats in the country, in fact. And so I think the party is happy with how the campaign is going so far. Obviously, Ed's been having a lot of fun, and that's what we're mainly seeing in the newspapers and Twitter. Lots of good photos for him wheeling down hills on a bike, slightly precariously, I might add, enjoying an ice cream on the beach, and of course falling off a paddleboard 5 times in quite comical ways. But critically, our activists around the country have also been getting out and knocking on a lot of doors, and the ground game is what really matters for the Lib Dems, talking to voters face to face.
Is there a danger of it all looking a bit unserious, though? It sort of makes you look a bit like the silly party.
I can see why people might think that, but I think we have to remember that, you know, this group of people here, we are plugged into politics all the time. So we might be following and analysing every single move that various politicians are making, but most people don't do that, and actually they tend to tune into what's happening in election campaigns quite late in the cycle. So, you know, as I mentioned, I think the most important thing for the Lib Dems is getting noticed, and Ed is certainly making sure of that.
Coming back to the Conservatives, Chris, I've been struck by, you talked about kind of the dangers of having the policy narrative but not shifting the polls. I guess the other thing is it's quite an expensive approach that's being taken. If you sort of tot up the defence spending, which is about $6 billion a year, then you've got national service, which is another $2.5 billion, and then you've got the pensioner tax relief, which is another $2.4 billion. Given one of the big attack lines the Conservatives have historically used against Labour is they're the fiscally irresponsible ones. Meanwhile, Labour have had massive success pointing to the 120 business leaders backing them. Conservatives have yet to produce kind of a business endorsement. Do you worry that in the weeks to come, without kind of a big economic policy, you run the risk of more things happening like today, where Jeremy Hunt on the Today programme was dragged into a sort of humiliating climb down on fiscal income tax, where he basically, after having a go at Labour's tax thresholds, had to say that he would also keep freezing income tax thresholds if he were to win the election?
Yes, it's strange. We've had a complete role reversal in this election. So normally the Conservatives, the party, it's sort of fiscal discipline, and they accuse the Labour Party about running out of money and that sort of thing. We have had that flip, and we haven't yet had the manifesto. And I expect the big policy in the Conservative manifesto will probably be a big offer around inheritance tax, which will cost another few million, I'm sure. But what I think it tells you is that the Conservative Party is very much sort of the underdog here, and they have to punch through with some big ticket ideas. It's not good enough for them to sort of play it safe and sort of get through the campaign. They have to make an impact. And they're speaking to a particular audience. They are speaking to older voters, people who might be tempted to flirt with the Reform Party, who would eat into Conservative seats. So they're really targeted on those people. And, the topics they've chosen are the things that those voters want to hear, and, they expect to mobilise them. So they are, frankly, sacrificing a little bit of the fiscal discipline in favour of that. But I think what it also does, they would say, is it takes away some of the leeway that Rachel Reeves has. So, for example, 2.5 billion on national service to be paid for by clamping down on tax avoidance is something Rachel Reeves has said she wants to do to spend elsewhere. So they say, well, hold on, we're going to spend it on this. So how can you spend it now on what you want to spend it on? And it just gets you into that whole argument. So they are making a bit of a sacrifice there, but it just reflects the position they're in. They're behind. They need to mobilise those voters. They need some big retail offers to get some excitement into the campaign and to put Labour on the back foot and say, frankly, are you going to match these things? And that's what it's about. It's about drawing those dividing lines in the early days of the campaign and trying to get a bit of excitement amongst the people that Conservatives need to turn out.
And Chris, what about the reform threat? Nigel Farage was speaking yesterday. Maybe a sign that he's not going to be heading to the US anytime soon, and perhaps he's going to be ever present throughout the election campaign. That's unlikely to be welcome news in the Conservative Party. What's the strategy for dealing with reform?
So it is very much to basically say, look, firstly, here are the big retail offers for you if you're tempted to vote for reform. Secondly, to say that any vote for reform is really a vote for Keir Starmer. You're just going to let him in through the back door, so don't do it. And thirdly, the Conservative Party is the party about the Rwanda policy. If you vote for the Conservative Party wins, flights can take off to Rwanda. Keir Starmer is not going to do that. So those are the three messages. But it's a significant issue. People forget about the 2019 election. There's a view about the 2019 election that Boris Johnson was some fantastic vote winner who swept the country. It's fundamentally not true. Boris Johnson got about the same number of votes as Theresa May got in 2017. The reason Boris Johnson won in 2019 in the way he did was because he did a deal with Nigel Farage to get his UKIP candidates to stand down in key seats. And there was a discussion about this yesterday, and the Conservative Party have ruled out doing a deal with Nigel Farage this time round. That means they have to win over those voters and basically say to them, if you vote reform, you get Keir Starmer. Trouble is, at the moment, there's no suggestion at all that is cutting through with voters that matter.
Now, there's Chris Wilkins, who worked for Theresa May's Director of Strategy and was Chief Speechwriter. Thank you to him from the Conservatives, to Alice Perry, former Chair of Labour's National Executive Committee, and from the Lib Dems, Luisa Porritt, a former member of the European Parliament. Thank you to you all, and hope to hear from many of you next week.
Well, that's it from us and our panel for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo, and our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Yuan Potts. Our panel will be back next Thursday, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.